topics and issues. As we were discussing, we may be changing this to a happy hour in the future. The hopes that many folks are awake and ready to go. But just wanted to welcome y'all and thank Commissioner Michelle Long-Spears for sponsoring these important community events. And as a precinct manager, very excited that we're talking about these voting issues and educating people about what to expect, things you may not know, answer questions. And I am happy, Michelle, I don't know if you wanted to say a few words or if Michelle, if you want to come up first and say a few words, and then we'll bring Karli Swift and Randy Faigin will start their presentation.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm Michelle Long-Spears, District 2 Commissioner. I'm glad to be here today and very honored to sponsor the exit issues. That is so far. I know today was a light turnout, but otherwise it's been a pretty good experience. I understand that the exit issues at the sheriff's went really well. We did another one with AI. That was a lot of fun. And actually the gentleman also who did the AI one is an old friend of mine from 15 years ago. So very special that he was the first one. But today's on elections. So I would like to tell you my story. And for me, I'm glad it's a small group because I haven't been told this story publicly. What is interesting is that 3 people in this room were actually familiar with my election. You were familiar from the campaign side, you're familiar from the election side, and you're familiar from what was being a precinct manager, working at the polls. And so in 2022, I threw my name into the race, added to the race for the District 2 seat in March. And so it was the first, I think qualifying is the first week of March. Threw my name in the hat for qualifying. The election, the primary was May 23rd. So it was roughly about like nine and a half weeks or so from start to the primary. And so for anybody who's run for public office before, it is a whole, and Liz, chime in if you want here, because you do have intimate knowledge of this, is that there's a lot to do on the front. There's printing signs, there's designing a website, getting canvassers, business cards, setting up listening sessions, community meetings. There's just so much. And when you're a new candidate, I've never run for public office before. And prior to that, I am a super voter, was a super voter then. I helped friends on campaigns. I made contributions, but I was never really like deeply entrenched in the campaigns. I didn't know all that was behind just the setup of the campaign, much less running a campaign. I had a really good campaign manager, so that was helpful. And then also on the very front end, I had a very strong, I call them basically my personal board of directors, but a super strong board of directors of about 8 people, my kitchen cabinet. And so we started meeting super early, or really not super early, I had about 2.5 months, but in the very beginning, just to talk about how we're going to roll it out, the resources we needed, the amount of funds that I had to raise. So campaign just progressed like a campaign. Again, it was fast and furious, and it was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed the door knocking, and I enjoyed the phone banking more so than I had ever thought I would. And what I learned about the campaign process is it's really a study in research, right? And it's really kind of rolling up your sleeves, peeling back the layers, and getting to what the core issues are in your county. So really it was just more of a journey, a learning journey. So fast forward all the way up until election day. What some people don't know, I guess most people don't know, is my dog died on election day. And it was heartbreaking. He was diagnosed with cancer, and by miracles and 4 rounds of chemotherapy, I was able to keep him alive. But about 3 days before my election, he was literally like starting to fall down. The morning of my election, he could barely. And so we had UGA was where he went for his chemo treatments. So my husband and I jumped in the car after waiting signs in the morning, ran to UGA because they requested me to put him down, send him along the Rainbow Bridge because they loved him. He was like the house dog. They didn't even make him stay in the cage when he was at UGA getting his chemo treatments. He was allowed to just kind of run throughout the facility. So they loved it. So ran over there, came back, and did your typical watch party that night. We had a great turnout, and so we're watching the screen, like, something's weird here. Something's very strange. And so at the watch party, it took, I don't remember when we actually ended up the election, putting out the information on the election. But it was probably 3 o'clock in the morning or before, it might have been before that. I know I woke up around 3 o'clock. So at the watch party, came back, fell asleep on my computer after I made it. I'm like, get out of my house, people. I'm tired. I've got to go to sleep. These are going to win or lose at this point. Fell asleep at my computer, woke up, so I lost. So, oh my goodness, I don't understand. I was leading and advanced voting and absentee. So this is so strange. So I'm kind of a data nerd. So I pull out all the election results. I'm going literally race by race, going one advanced, one absentee. This doesn't track, right? So then we had someone in the community in Brookhaven went to his precinct and he saw 0 votes for me. I said, well, that's weird. So he ended up sending it to a friend. The friend sent it to my campaign manager. About 8 something in the morning, my campaign manager called me. Said, something's wrong, Michelle. That's unusual. I said, huh, okay. So I'm sitting there, and again, I'm thinking about my dog that passed and the fact that I lost. I've thrown so 150% of myself into it for 2.5 months. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna investigate. So I grab my keys, jump in my car, go up to Montgomery Elementary, climbing school's in session. I'm climbing up on their little brick wall because they put the ticker tape up so high I couldn't see it. I realized I'm climbing up. I'm in my pajamas. Fortunately for me, they were street-looking pajamas enough. Little black pants, little shirt, but nonetheless, they were my pajamas. So Montgomery was 0. Then I went over to where I voted, 0. Oh my goodness, this isn't possible. I'm calling my husband, you voted for me, right? He's like, yes. I voted, I'm like, are you sure you weren't real keen on me running for this office? He's like, oh no, I voted for you. I said, okay, so we sounded the alarm, blew the horn as loud as we could, called the local election folks, got in touch with some people at the state level. Said, hey, this is bizarre. This is not anything we've seen. Even the people from some of the full precinct managers, something's off. You know, you rarely see. I mean, Liz, have you ever seen that before in all your years in campaigns?
No, definitely.
So it was just a wild, weird thing. And so anyways, at that point, of course, I'm freaking out. And then word gets out to my opponent, my 2 opponents. And in fairness, all 3 of us we were working hard. Like all the candidates there was nobody just kind of on easy street in that campaign. Everybody was fundraising, constituent connecting and events and listening sessions. We did all of these, not debates, but forums, all the different forums, and everybody's working hard. And when those results came out, I was in last place, and then there was someone in second, and then someone in first, of course. And of course, the person in first thought, you know, hey, I'm going into the runoff. The first and second would have made the runoff, which was in June, and it's 30 days between the actual primary and the runoff. So when you have 30 days, the second those results come out, you're hitting the road and the ground, and you're preparing for a runoff campaign. Runoffs are very different than running just a traditional campaign. Runoffs are fast, furious. You almost have to raise as much money in that short period of time. So in my case, we again sounded the alarm, and I got, fortunately for me during my entire campaign, is I didn't watch any social media because I didn't want to see what was written. I didn't even really have time, and so I didn't see a lot of what was being put out there when those election results were released. But praised along the lines of, she's going to eat crow, she lost, blah, blah, blah. And so, okay, I get it. I'm not a sore loser. I lost. But in that case, something was just not right. So we ended up connecting with the right people at the Berry, someone actually on the board who was able to kind of guide us through the process. Was able to talk with Director Keisha Smith as well. It took several days for them to get back with us. But in fairness, there was a lot for them to look into. This was a pretty big blunder, right? And so Director Smith did get in touch with us probably with all the candidates, say maybe 5 days, about that list. I think you were involved about five or so days later. It was 4 or 5 days. And so I understood her position. There was so much to figure out. But when you're the candidate, you're waiting for 4 or 5 days, knowing that 2 out of the 3 of you are going to be in that runoff, that the clock is a ticking.
The early, like the runoff was short, done, right?
It was
22.
Yeah, it was still 30 days.
Yeah, so, yeah, new election machine, and then they're going to do it. Remember, there's certification that happened before.
So can I add one? You should go.
Okay.
Because when a race ends,
Mhm.
the the votes are not set.
Right.
And so what happens is, this is a great example of why our elections are actually pretty safe, because you have to go and certify, confirm those votes. So when you guys raised it, the office was already looking at reviewing the tabulations and also finding out that there was an issue.
Yes.
And so what it means is those are not final. The results that come out the day that a race ends
Right.
are preliminary and formal until they get certified. So during that certification period is when they're being reviewed. But to your point, in this instance, when there's a really short runoff, candidates are very nervous because you have to rate. But all races have to be certified before you move to the next level. So that's what's gonna happen in this race. That's why there's that big, the question.
Yeah, it's thought like a mistake was kind of like it should be the date that from the date of certified rather than the date of the election, because of things that, I mean, also too, like, with a pandemic and things like that.
Right.
It's too longer to even
Right.
like the votes or whatnot.
But it was 30
was-
days.
Right, which was a,
It was
yeah.
certified.
Yeah, I think the first time too.
Right, so the election was on Tuesday, so 10 days later, it was certified on a Friday.
Right.
Because I attended the certification. Oh, it was a Zoom. So in between the Tuesday of election to that 10 days later of when it being certified, again, eating into our 30-day window, means it left us really 20 days, right, for business. And so in that full 10-day time frame, there was hiring an attorney. There was trying to get with the local folks and the state folks. Something's wrong. So in the end, it ended up being 35 out of 40 precincts. I ended up getting 0 votes in.
On election day.
There,
Yeah.
on
You got-
that election.
You got votes in, but they weren't tabulated
Well,
correctly.
let's finish.
Yeah.
So yes, what happened is that initially there were 4 people in the race. About a month into the election process, right, as we were gearing up for the primary, one of the candidates dropped out of the race. So it went from 4 to 3. And so we had someone with a last name of A was the first category, someone with a last name with an O, the second, basically, data cell, if you will. And then I am Spears. And so I was the third. So we had the drop off of one of the candidates. There was some issues at the state level with the programming of the machines. There was an issue with the local level of the logic and accuracy testing, and it just wasn't caught prior to the election. So in that 10-day time frame, we had to investigate what happened. They had to figure out how they were going to do it. And so what ended up ultimately happening is that the weekend of Memorial Day, and there's a reason I'm telling y'all this story. One is the first time I've told it publicly. And it was good to have such a small group with informed people in the room. But it's, again, it's just why I believe so much in integrity in elections. But again, that 10-day time frame was infused with so many players and stakeholders just trying to figure out what happened. And so what we were pushing for from my camp was a hand count because of the tabulation problems with the results of the election. Again, 35 out of 40 were tabulated for Spears at 0 votes. The 5, to my understanding, that actually got the votes correct were the ones, because it was a year of redistricting. It was like a perfect storm, to be honest. And so the elections folks had already been tasked with the redrawing of the line. Well, mistakes happen. They happen in every jurisdiction. You can't be mad at the elections folks. It just is what it is. And so there were some issues with some of the folks that should have been drawn into District 2, and then there were some neighborhoods that were supposed to have been in District 3. So some of the elections folks, the ones that were the watchdogs, they found 5 discrepancies, 5 irregularities with their precinct. And so they were able to alert the elections folks. I don't know what the process is on y'all's end, but alert the elections folks that they were in the wrong commissioner race. So it didn't appear correct on the ballot. So they corrected it, I guess, reissued the absentee ballots, and then were able to fix that problem for those 5 different precincts, but it wasn't caught in the other 35 precincts. So we pushed this hand count and we were successful. So this makes me, it will always melt and warm my heart. It will remind me why democracy is so important and why integrity in elections is just core to democracy, to being an American, to knowing that your voice is heard, to know that your vote counts. I showed up on Memorial Day weekend and I was criticized heavily by my opponents because it was my daughter's graduation, high school graduation up in Connecticut. And so I wasn't going to miss graduation. I just, I'm a mom. I'm not going to miss my daughter's graduation. So flew over to Connecticut, went to the election, on the phone with the lawyer right before she's walking across the stage. And I'm like, I cannot talk to you anymore. My daughter's about to graduate. I'll call you later. It's crazy. Flew back on a Sunday, went straight up to Memorial's office and saw the number of people that were there. There were 20 tables of 3 people each in hot Memorial Day weather, in a warehouse environment, eating okay cold pizza. But these people, they rounded them up at the last minute to come and do the hand count. And it was absolutely amazing to see how these people gave up their holiday weekend for the love of the elections process. Nothing has ever moved me in the election world more than that day. And I remember I got interviewed by Fox and I turned around, I'm like, poof, just in tears. And I'm thinking, if I lose, I lose. I am so glad that I got to really experience the importance of elections. And when something goes wrong, how quickly people will jump into action to fix it, to figure out what happened, because it means so much to us, to our freedom, to us being American. And so they went through this whole process. They started out with an accuracy and logic testing, challenges with the machines. Then that's what triggered the actual hand count. So it was a very organized process. Again, tables of 3 folks went through this multi-day hand count. And at the end, I ended up getting the most votes. At that point, it was, I think 46% is where I landed. So still had to run, do the runoff election, which was insane. But that was actually the primary piece of it for the primary election. So that being said, when Shara asked about, what can we do for exit issues, I just think that it is so important for us to just spread the message how lucky we are in this country to have the ability to vote and how important that means, and that your vote matters. Your voice counts. I hear people all the time, well, I'm not going to show up and vote because my voice doesn't count. And you have no idea how much your voice counts. And, you hear, vote down the ballot. You want people to get down to these local races. And elected office in the local level, we're the closest to you. When when you have a pothole, you want a new park, your water stinks or is yellow, your sewer backs up, whatever it is, that's all the stuff at the local level. So whenever you have, sometimes with local, you only hear from people when there is a problem, and often that's the case. But I like to think of it in a different way. That's an opportunity to really touch these people and let them know how important your local electeds are, and how important it is for you to remember that you need to vote the whole ballot and not just the top of the ballot. So thank you guys for letting me to tell you. You are my guinea pigs of telling this story publicly. But it was a wonderful experience, truly, despite all of the hiccups and what happened. It really just showed me how important our elections folks are. Everyone that shows up, like sheriff, the precinct manager, all of our poll workers, all of our advocacy groups, that people go out and try to get people registered to vote, is that we would not be this country without you all. We just couldn't be. So thank you so very much. I appreciate it. And I'll let her go on.
Hi, everyone. Karli Swift. I'm currently the chair of the DeKalb County Voter Registration and Elections Office. I was on the board. I wasn't the chair when during Commissioner Spears' race, but I do want to say the one thing that my takeaway was that from what happened is elections. Like the elections process is secure and does have integrity. And the fact that we were all collaborative and fixing and getting to the right result, right? I think what's interesting is I have a different perspective because I was a part of the behind the scenes and what was happening. And so I can imagine being the candidate and seeing the results and saying, what is going on? But what the candidate doesn't know is that we were already getting calls when those numbers were coming out that said, hey, I voted for a person and it's zero, because all of the numbers that you're seeing are being are public numbers that are sent out. So you can see at each precinct how many people are voting. So at that point, you realize from an administration perspective, okay, there's an issue. But we can't take just one candidate's, position on something. We have to start to do the investigation so that we can get to numbers that are accurate and that we can certify those numbers. And so there was, in this instance, a lot of back and forth with running elections is very complex, as you have heard. And we have a position about what happened. That position may not be shared by everyone, and I won't go into belabor what it was, but there was an era, as Commissioner Spears mentioned, when a person was removed from the ballot. The state actually codes ballots. And so the county has no control over that. We do accuracy and we do identify problems, and we tell the state those problems. And there may have been some communication gaps there, neither here nor there. But what's important, I think, for everyone to understand is that the final results of a race are not final until they're certified. And they're not certified until the administration goes through the process of confirming that those numbers are correct. And when there are issues, we fix them. So that day that Commissioner Spears is talking about, I was there. And so what happens is whenever there's an error that would require us to do a hand count, there was no, it may feel like the commissioners might feel like you push for that. We were doing a hand counting. That was what was going to happen because we weren't comfortable with the numbers. And we weren't comfortable with sort of just doing a review of the machine. And so the process that Commissioner Spears sort of walked through is a standard process where there's a 3-person group. So when at the end of like the next election, if there are ballots where we can't tell what the marking was, we have what's called a vote review panel. And so that's usually a Democrat, Republican, and then a third party person that reviews. So there are 3 people that review the ballot, and they determine by majority vote what that vote should be, right? And so that same process happens when you kind of a hand count. It requires, we have I'm gonna get the number right, but 151 precincts. So we have thousands of poll workers, we have managers, we have area managers that are out right now. We have our polls are open from 7 to 7 every day. Once the election ends, we're gonna start that process of vote review panels. Usually that's gonna come into play with like absentee ballots, where it's not a machine marking, it's an actual marking where we can't tell, someone might have put an X instead of circling it in. And so that team is going to determine how that vote gets allocated. There are going to be folks that are viewing, the public can view the tabulation process. So I invite you all to come down. It's a really cool experience election to see how we get all of the memory cards in, how the ballots are counted, like absentee ballots or UACAVA, which are overseas ballots. And so it's a complex process, but it's a process that is actually really efficient. And when issues are raised, we work collaboratively to try to make sure. Also, the Board of Elections is it's not an elected board, it's an appointed board. We're just regular citizens. We have real jobs. And I like to remind people that, like, we don't have a dog in this fight. And so we want to make sure that the results are accurate, and that the voting experience is efficient. And I think we have actively worked, at least on the 4 years that I've been on the board, to do that. And so I hope that you all are having a better voting experience. And if you're not, you can give me a call or anyone. So I think, just reminding everyone that we have, I think, 13 days left until election day. Early voting, we have expanded the number of early voting locations in DeKalb. We have 20 this year, which is the highest number that we have had since I've been here. We have been on the board. We have made a huge effort to make sure that we have locations across the county. So if there are any areas that don't have early vote locations, it's because we couldn't find a site that fit the requirements, the legal requirements. So in 2021, there was a bill that was passed in the state legislature that changed the types of locations that we could have for early vote locations, and it actually reduced. It meant that some of the locations we previously had didn't work. It has to be a state or county or state-owned facility. So it has to be a facility that the state has put some funds into it, or it has to be a location that will also be a election day location. So that means there are a lot of locations that we have during early vote that are only early vote locations, but they're not also precincts during election days. And there are a lot of reasons. There's scheduling conflict, just reasons why that. The other thing that is important that you should let people in your networks know is that we just passed a resolution that allows someone to drop off their absentee ballot at any of the early vote locations. That's really important because before you could only mail it in and you could drop it off at the memorial location, but now it can be dropped off at any early vote location. And so we are really pushing people, if they have absentee ballots, because of what we're seeing with the mail, it is very important that you try to drop those ballots off if you can, and maybe drop them off for your local one. Other than that, as issues come up, it is very important that you let us know. So the office is always available. I can leave my email and phone number as well, because the earlier that we, know that problems exist, more quickly we can fix those. So, yeah.
And is it a phone call that people would report, or is there a mechanism online that people could do that?
There are voter protection lines that many of that are out there. We don't have that's a good option. I will say that, again, because of how massive this operation is, we have we bring in thousands of temporary employees that are working. So a call is probably easier. An email is fine, or text with issues. Because of how big DeKalb is, oftentimes the problem, if there's a problem, we're hearing about it from multiple stakeholders. But yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, thank you all. And again, like, just please remind people to get out and vote. And we'll see you at the polls. Thank you. Okay, remember it's fine.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Randy Faigin, Leadership DeKalb Class of 2016. Best class ever-ish. And I work with VoteRiders, which is one of the many democracy organizations that are out in this space. Every democracy organization is important and plays an important role. And I am going to be talking about voting in DeKalb in general, and then specifically about voter ID. And I am happy to take any questions as we go along, but a little bit about VoteRiders and me. VoteRiders was established in 2012, and for you voting nerds, that is because that's when Shelby County changed their voting rules in, at the time, a way that was not consistent with the Voting Rights Act. And it led to the Supreme Court case Shelby versus Holder, which allowed for changes in voting laws in states with a discriminatory history, like Georgia. And so the Shelby versus Holder ruling allowed those laws to change, the states to change laws without getting pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. When that happened, there was an immediate proliferation of voter ID laws, as well as all sorts of things that we've heard about. So my organization was founded as a nonpartisan nonprofit to ensure that whatever the law is, voters have the resources that they need so that they can comply with the law. And that means help voters get IDs if they don't have one. So what we'll talk about today is generally voting. We'll talk a little about voter ID laws, and then as leaders in DeKalb, what role you can play and what difference you can make. So the basics of voting: you got to be registered. If you aren't registered to vote, it's too late for this election, but you should still register so you're upset for the next one. The deadline in Georgia, you have to be registered 30 days in advance of election day. So that day was October 7th. You probably saw all sorts of social media, and you probably got texted about 50 times at least from different organizations telling you to check your voter registration, and hopefully you did. Once, if you have a question about your registration status, you can go to the website that the Secretary of State runs. It's a very good website for checking your status, checking what your precinct is. You can get your sample ballot, and it will show your registration status. I don't know if I have a slide specific about that. I do not. It is important to note that even if your status on that website is inactive, you are allowed to vote. The only people who are not allowed to vote if they were once registered is if they are no longer registered. So, or a few circumstances we'll talk about. But what happens is people pull up their status, and if you don't vote in a couple of sessions, you get moved to inactive. The best way to cure inactive status is to vote. But we get a lot of calls from people who see inactive and they think that means they're not allowed to vote. Someday when I get to fix everything in this world, it will be including that word inactive, because it's a scary word. But if you hear people say that, oh, I can't vote, it says inactive, just tell them, yeah, you can, go vote, and then you won't be inactive anymore. So the special circumstances I want to talk about a little bit: college students. Under Georgia law, college students can vote using a campus address, if that's what they choose to register with, or wherever they might have been before. They have to choose one or the other, can't do both. So that comes up a lot for college students. But at this point, they must have made that, they had to have made that decision by October 7th. So if they're not sure what they did, they can go to that Secretary of State website and check. And then justice impacted folks. That is a group where it's very confusing. There's a lot of disinformation, but in Georgia, under Georgia law, if you are not currently serving a sentence for felony conviction, you are allowed to vote. And it's complicated because every single one of those terms is a term of art. Currently serving, felony conviction, all of those things. If you're a first-time offender, it is not a felony conviction. You're allowed to vote. If you are on probation, you're still serving your sentence. But any questions, I always mention this because a lot of folks, they don't usually like raise their hand. Hey, I've got this conviction, I'm not sure. So I'd like to make sure that as leaders, we all know the resource so that if you hear of something like that coming up, you can point the person to the resources that they need. And that's the Georgia Justice Project. They go to their website, they have the best information and like a flow chart that you can go through with your different very particular circumstances to figure out whether or not you're eligible to vote. The last I talked with them, there are 350,000 justice impacted folks in Georgia who are eligible to vote who may not know it. And that's a huge voting block. So it's important, if you have the right to vote, we want you to know that you have that right and to be able to exercise it. Yeah.
Would they appear inactive if they went to MVP, or how would they appear?
Oh, that's a great question. And no, it's very hard and nebulous. Their voter registration should have been taken away and they have to re-register,
Okay.
but sometimes that's not clear. And that's really scary. Like if you're justice impacted, you don't want to take a whole lot of chances. So that's where call Georgia Justice Project and they will help. But that's a good question. Okay. So I assume most of you know this, especially because half of us either work in elections or are elected officials, but 3 ways to vote in Georgia. So I'm going fast and I might skip stuff, but if you have a question, ask. You can vote absentee. The deadline to apply for an absentee ballot is Friday. I do not recommend doing that. It's especially with the mail. If you do not have your absentee ballot in your hand right now, I highly encourage you to choose a different method of voting. But absentee is available, and for some folks, that's the only option. And take advantage of it. Better options, easier options, are to vote early. That is the best option. As Karli said, DeKalb has some of the best early voting hours of any county, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days a week. I think on Sundays it starts at noon, but that is a lot of time where you can find the time to vote. So that is the best way to do it. The other reason to vote early and not on election day, I have some people who live in my household that I gave birth to who want to vote on election day because it's like the real thing. And if you can go early, make space for someone who can't so that there's a little bit less crowd. There's an easier way to find a parking spot. Just, make it easier for your fellow citizens. But that's early voting. And then of course, election day voting, the polls are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on election day. For early voting, you can vote anywhere in the county that is open for early voting. So that's another great reason to do it. Like, I picked a location that was near a place I wanted to have lunch. It was not in my neighborhood because I wanted to get out. On election day, you have to vote at your assigned precinct. And if you don't vote at that assigned precinct, your vote will not count. So you have to be sure you can get back to wherever your neighborhood is. Like if you work in Chamblee and you live in Lakeside, you need to make sure you can get back to your neighborhood and vote while the polls are open on election day. So takeaway, vote early. Oh, one more thing about the absentee ballots that Karli talked about dropping at drop boxes. They have to be received by 7 p.m. on election day. That is confusing. Some states have different rules. Some of the states with different rules are in the news a lot. And that makes people in Georgia think that our rules might be different, but the rule in Georgia is that absentee ballot has to be in the elections office by 7 p.m. on election day. That means you can turn it in at a drop box, those things, but the drop boxes are only open during early voting, which ends on Friday, November 1st. So bottom line, vote by Friday, November 1st, turn in your absentee ballot by Friday, November 1st. if you need to mail that absentee ballot, mail it as soon as possible, because it doesn't matter when you mail it. What matters is when it gets there, and none of us can control that. The postmark is not relevant in Georgia.
Hmm.
Oh, wrong way. Okay, so let's talk about voter ID laws for a minute, because that's the thing that VoteRiders does the most. In 2021, we saw a lot of legislation, a lot of increase in voter ID laws. And we can talk about why that is, but the bottom line is things changed a lot in 2021. And here is a map. The orange states have stricter voter ID laws or new voter ID laws that were adopted in 2021, 2022 that existed before. The purple states have had the same voter ID laws the whole time, and the white states don't have any voter ID laws. So 38 states have voter ID laws, and those laws make it harder for people to vote. And one of the things that I worry about all the time is the people who only vote in presidential election cycles. These are new to them. If you voted in 2022, if you're a nerd and you vote every election, you're familiar with the new laws. But if you only vote in presidential cycles, these are going to be new laws when you go vote this time. So what we have found at VoteRiders, and we are a national organization, we do a lot of surveys of how people interpret ID laws, what their understanding is that voter ID laws have a chilling effect on so many people, even if they live in a state that doesn't have voter ID laws. They think they need an ID to vote. So if someone loses their wallet or forgets to bring it when they go vote, they say, oh, I can't vote, I don't have my wallet. We're like, you live in California, you don't need an ID to vote. But it's so confusing. So a lot of what my organization does is voter education like this, especially to people in leadership positions, people who have large networks, so that we can make sure everyone has the knowledge that they need to vote, as well as, of course, the ID. And if voters don't feel confident, they might not go vote. That's the key piece. It's like, it's one more thing that you're like, oh, there's traffic, I'm hungry, it's raining, I'm not sure I have the right ID, maybe I just won't vote. That's what we're trying to combat. So ID laws in Georgia. We know we have to be registered. You have to make your plan to vote. That's what we just talked about, like vote early. And you have to make sure you've got that ID, and that ID is the final step. So in Georgia, you need a photo ID from a government organization. If you have a Georgia driver's license, that is the gold standard of ID. And you can use a Georgia driver's license even if it's expired. So that's important for a lot of our older folks in nursing homes who need an ID even for an absentee ballot, which is a new rule. My organization, VoteRiders, will help any voter who doesn't have a state ID get a state ID, and we will pay the costs for that ID. And that's so if folks who need it, like I was in Augusta working with folks over the weekend who's lost their IDs in storm related damage, and it costs $32 to get a state ID. That's prohibitive. If you have to have a birth certificate. If you don't have a birth certificate, you were born in Georgia, it costs $25 to get one from Vital Records. So VoteRiders will help with those fees. We will cover the fees, and we will help with the process. Other IDs that are available is any unexpired government ID. Passport. If you work for the city of Chamblee and you have a Chamblee ID, great, you can use that. There is also a free voting ID, which you can get from the county elections office. It is only accepted for voting. It has its own set of rules to get. But for right now, if someone doesn't have an ID, you tell them call VoteRiders and go get your free voting ID, because it takes a minute to get a state ID and you have to go to DDS and all this stuff. And we want them to have that. You could go to the DeKalb elections office today, get your free ID and vote. And then VoteRiders will still help you get your state ID. Yes.
So even if it's expired, somebody, like, to use your example of somebody in a retirement community, it could be 5 years expired and they can still utilize that for their,
If it's a driver's license.
right,
If it's just a state
Right.
ID, no.
exactly, okay.
Yes, that's a great question. It has to be a Georgia
Right.
driver's license. If they, like, if someone, anybody moved here and they still have their Michigan driver's license, they can use it as long as it's unexpired. But if it's your grandparents that you moved from Michigan to the nursing home and they don't drive and they have a Michigan driver's license that expired, they need to get a different form of ID. Good question. Yeah.
Does the pre-voter ID expire?
It expires if you move out of the county. So that it's a little bit complicated. So we want it for right now, but we're gonna still want that person to get a state ID that, has a normal expiration date, and you don't have to remember, ooh, I moved. Oh yeah, shoot, now I need to go get a new free voter ID.
How much does it cost to get a Georgia driver?
$32.
Okay.
I think I have, I think I have a list of the money stuff. So to vote absentee in Georgia, we've made it really confusing. I bet you guys get a lot. I mean, my children who attend college, who are smart enough to attend college, got confused. And I have one of their ballots to return in my bag because of such confusion. But to apply for that absentee ballot, which you have to do by Friday, you need one of these 3 forms of ID: the driver's license number, again, the gold standard, or a copy or picture of a government ID, or an official document that shows name and date of birth. And this can be really hard, especially for our nursing home folks. Something we encourage, because they don't have utility bills.
Address, not date of birth.
Oh, yes, address. They don't have utility bills necessarily, but usually the nursing home can print an official document for them. But this is a new law. So this is the group I worry about, because I've had so many calls from nursing home administrators who are like, help me figure this out. How do we make sure we can get our folks to vote? And we figure it out, but it takes a minute. And then to return that absentee ballot, once you get it, again, you need that driver's license number, but this time it's different. Or last 4 digits of the social, or photocopy of government ID. So it's hard and confusing, and hard and confusing is not good. And that's why VoteRiders is here to help with that. When I said the name and date of birth, that's to get the free state ID. So it's even there is a different requirement. It's a lot, but we're here to help folks navigate whatever it is. So, here, how we can help. Is this the money page? No. So Liz, you were asking $32 to get a state ID, and then there was another.
How much was that to get a driver?
Same thing, $32. So a state ID is exactly a driver's license, except you don't get to drive.
Yeah.
And it has to be unexpired. So, but yes, so that's prohibitive. And VoteRiders will get rides we have a Lyft is one of our sponsors, so we'll get folks lifts to go to the driver services to get the ID, all the stuff.
Or the access, like.
But even to take a driver's test, like it's just, there's extra costs, like.
Yeah.
Your car has to,
You have to have a car.
you have to have a car, it has to be all working, like. I had several teen drivers in the house at once, and we had a car that, had some duct tape holding up a side view mirror. And that we couldn't use it for a driver test because, and then they had to use my car, and I wasn't happy about that either, but what are you gonna do? But it's just, yeah, I know, it is interesting, but yeah. So, things you can do, make sure you know the rules for your state, like the thing I said about people call us from states that don't even have voter ID rules thinking they can't vote. And then you can share that in your discussions with other people. I've brought here lots of voter ID information cards. You are welcome to take as many as you want. People order these, like different organizations that are like, we partner with Potter Latinx and Muslim Voter Project and all sorts of groups that are doing Get Out the Vote that are C3. And we give them these cards. You can order them on our website and share them everywhere you go. Like I drop them off at the library and, we want people to know the rules. That's the first step. And any questions or anyone who needs help getting that ID, that is the VoteRiders helpline, 866 ID to vote. Will help anyone as long as they are eligible to vote and they live in a voter ID state. So we're not going to spend the money to get someone in California an ID because they don't need it to vote, and we are actually about voting. Oh, so the things that you need, I just have these are the things that we cover and what you need to get a driver's license and how it can be really hard. Like these folks I was talking to for the hurricane, like most of them lost their birth certificate and their driver's license. Hopefully they know their social security number by heart. If they don't, things get, then we're like, can you go to your employer and get a copy of your employment record, all of those things. And when you talk about voter ID, when you talk about voting, include ID as part of your conversation, because it's not, people, I'm sure you're all the people in your networks that people call you and say, okay, who am I supposed to vote for? And where do I go vote? And what am I supposed to do on these amendments? And to include in there, make sure to bring your ID. And then this is a different phone number. This is to answer your question from earlier, Debbie. If someone has an issue with the polls, questions, that is what 866 ID to vote is our number. There's another number I will give you. It's on a different slide. It's 866 our vote. OUR. Is it there? Oh, good. And that is the C3 national voter support number. It's run by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and that they have experts in every state. On election day, they have their teams. I'm on their team for Georgia for ID issues. And there are other phone numbers that political parties have, and that's great. This one is nonpartisan and national. And so anyone who has any question, even if it's the shoot, there's no parking spot, what do I do? Call that number, and then what they do is they'll, call over to whatever county it is, be like, hey, you need to open up more parking spots. They will solve the problems. And when we think about voting and voting access, it's been a long journey. It's been a long fight. The work that elected officials and candidates go through to get out the vote is every single step is really important. And that final step of make sure you have the ID so you can vote is just as important. And that's it. Questions?
I mean, I have a question.
Well, let's hear those questions. I have some too, but just look at her watch.
So these are all kind of sort of random and one and chime in here too, because when we were talking about Commissioner Spears' race and the hand counting, of late, and it was about the board of elections, the state and counting rule, which I forget about hand counting. And I was like, oh, I bet people are hearing hand count, oh, that was helpful, in the problem that Commissioner Spears had, her race, versus sort of like what the difference is with the law or the rule that was, that they did with the hand counting of the vote.
The one that the Supreme Court just said, So that one was at the precinct level. And you've probably been at precincts when they shut down. I've been at precincts when they shut down. My ask for Karli is, let's let these poll workers work half shift, because they have to be there like 5 in the friggin' morning. And they have to. I mean, like, I had the same working as observer when I was so tired. I wanted to cry. So that, like,
So one, hand counting of all elections is really a separate issue, because it is not an issue that the county election board, it would have to be like a statewide change. You have to get rid of the machine, whatever. That's an issue that we're not gonna win.
Yeah.
The rule that the state elections board passed 6 rules in the past month, which is very uncommon, because at this point, as I mentioned, we hire thousands of election staff every year. And every year we have trainings, required trainings that we're doing throughout the year to train the staff. So by this point, the staff has already, you can speak to this,
I was in training.
Yeah.
multiple hours-long training to update them on, just to update them on the actual protocol processes. There's so many rules that they have to comply with, the machines, walking them through how to forms, how to fix things. So like the first issue is that there just isn't time. We don't make these large wholesale changes a month or two before the election. The second piece of the rule, the hand count, is that what the rule was wanted to require is that at each precinct, so again, DeKalb has over 150 precincts, and each precinct has 20 plus people throughout the day that are there. And that it can be more than that depending on the size of the precinct. And they're just the complicatedness of it all. There are actual rules about how many machines that you can have at each precinct. And that's based on the number of voters that vote at that precinct location.
Registered or actually like?
Registered. Yeah, because when you look at voters, there's this point about active and inactive. So in DeKalb, we have about, let's say we have about 600,000 voters total. These are round numbers. 500,000 of those are considered active, and then 100,000 are inactive. The inactive voters can still vote, but they don't get counted in certain things like the number of mailboxes we get to have. So, what the rule wanted was the promulgated rule that SCU was trying to pass basically said at the end of each night, they wanted the election workers to take the paper, which is when you vote, you get a piece of paper and you feed it into the scanner, the BMD. They wanted to take the paper and count the paper to ostensibly to ensure that the paper matched a certain number. The problem is, when you've been working for 12 hours, the likelihood that human beings are going to like count paper and get the numbers right, it's just, sure it can happen, but it's very likely that you're gonna have miscounts. And counting paper actually does nothing. It also has custody, like, because you're taking them out of the machine, you're counting the paper, it just is it's a very nonsensical rule. And all it does is make the process harder and longer. And for an election administration position, our concern is we already are asking people to do a lot. And when you're asking them to do more, are we gonna lose these folks that are, I mean, we're paying them, but I mean, they're effectively volunteers. They have a stipend, but it's not, I mean, these are like me citizens that are taking time out of their day to really just support democracy. And so that's one. There are other rules that most of the rules didn't make sense because either they were already being done, they weren't going to change the efficiency or integrity of the election. Really, it's just putting more constraints on the process and slowing it down. So there were multiple lawsuits that were filed. DeKalb actually filed a lawsuit as well with Elections Board, the county, and CEO Thurman was an individual plaintiff on our lawsuit. But we filed the day after Cobb's lawsuit. Cobb just happened to file theirs first in Fulton. Full judge immediately heard theirs and stayed enjoying all of the rules from being implemented. Yesterday, there was an appeal that was sent to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unanimously voted not to allow the rules to go into effect. Their position was just, again, that it was too close to the election, so they will likely still hear this case at some point in theory, but it won't go into effect.
So Randy's question about poll workers working half shifts, I get that question a lot, and I know there's sometimes training or chain of custody.
Yeah, but what did we do?
I've always had to get paid, had to be the whole.
I don't know where any counties that allow. That's, no, put that on the list for things we can do
Yeah.
someday. But,
Yeah, I mean, like, the issue is that it's two things. It's like chain of custody. It's, you don't, it's a long day, but it's also very hard to figure out when you like.
the transition,
Well,
yeah,
who's in the transition, because the people that set it up really need to be the people that are
yeah.
taking down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for folks that don't know, when, like this is a precinct, this is what it looks like. So the team comes in at 5 o'clock in the morning and they have to set up this whole site to vote. And they have to take everything, put everything up, and then, you know, you're there throughout the day, and then they take it all down. And it is you know, it's so interesting. I wish more people would come attend our board member meetings and also just see the process.
Sorry, we already said 10:07, but if we have.
I was just asking what, whatever, how are you doing with the lack of workers, or do you have enough workers, or are you still in a deficit for this election?
So, we could always use more coworkers. We are staffed, and we certainly can have more. I mean, back to that point of having, we in DeKalb, because we are running so many hours and so many days, we are running every possible day. If we could have more, we would. Because our board, I've been affirmed ever since I joined the board of getting as many days and as many locations as we possibly have. In fact, we were one of the counties before the rule, the rules that the state passed reduced the number of days that we could have, because we always had weekend voting. But when they passed the law, like, for example, Thanksgiving, is it Thanksgiving?
It was in the runoff.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so, like, for the runoff.
Yeah.
We're actually not gonna be able to, if there's a runoff this year, we actually will not be able to have that weekend of Thanksgiving, because the rule says that you can't have, weekend voting the weekend of the election.
Yeah.
So the election's on the 3rd, December. I only know that because it's my birthday, so that's why I remember this. There, yeah. So we won't, like, and Thursday will be Thanksgiving. So
Right,
normally we have like early voting throughout that week, and in theory the weekend, but we can't do it on the weekend because of the state rules.
And our precinct this time is, I have 11 people at our precinct, we're fully staffed, but there's been some elections where we've had 4. You know, just because people don't show up.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, so it's, we're staffed. But but you want to have backups because people.
Life happens.
Right, people get sick, I mean, it's also a long day, it's
Yeah.
5 to,
7.
but really it's 5 to like 9.
Yeah, you know, 17, it's usually 17-hour day.
Yeah, it's a very long time.
What are the pre-game requirements?
So we actually increased our stipend, so we are in alignment with, I don't know,
I think my precinct manager was getting around 300.
yeah, it's how, it's
But
like,
I think the school students do it, I'm like, I don't know, like 50.
I would love the high school student, but that day is so long. I know, but Riley couldn't either. I know.
Yeah, pick up, like, put it on the Sunday.
Well, any high schooler I've spoken with, it's too long for them.
Yeah, you got to pick up on Sunday, set up on Monday, then work all day on Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
I can find.
yeah, I mean, you're not gonna get rid of voluntary, but you feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Best thing ever.
Yeah,
Like
you
like
feel
Karli said, I wish, it was like jury duty. I wish everybody had or could see, because it really restores, if you have any questions or, you know, that lack of faith, it restores your faith in the process.
And it was famous like that, everyone who does, like, it's not a partisan thing, it's really just trying to make sure everyone. Yeah, I don't know what, are you doing?
I'm cool with garlic. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you all who were able to join us online. We apologize that the link, apparently we have link. We will be sending out the recording PowerPoint presentation. And thank you, Commissioner Spears had to leave for another engagement, but thank you for Karli Swift and for Randy Faigin, for everybody else here who participated and asked questions. And we will see y'all very soon at our next one, which may be cocktails and conversation instead of eggs in the machine. Stay tuned.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thank y'all. Yeah, I don't.